Good morning. It's already clear that the Trump visit is going to be spectacular. The president's been firing from the hip in the press already, loves Boris Johnson, admires Nigel Farage, great trade deal in his pocket for us. Huge helicopters are thundering over North London, vast motorcades are being prepared, protesters are psyching themselves up. But behind all the ballyhoo, the royal banquet, all of that, there is a real decision for Britain here. After Brexit, do we try to stay close to Europe or do we do things differently? In this case, going the American way. This isn't just flash ceremony, it's a clear, hard choice. Now we have two contenders to be our next Prime Minister being put through their paces this morning. The Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, and the former Leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom, whose resignation precipitated Theresa May's downfall. All of those Tories, but another party is having a leadership contest as well. How big are Joe Swinson's ambitions for the Lib Dems? But of course, with all eyes on the Trump visit, what does the American president want from post-Brexit Britain? His ambassador in London, Woody Johnson, joins us live. And I've been talking about America in a very different context, with the great Sir Lenny Henry, who tells me how the work of African America's greatest playwright has lured him back to the London stage.
You come and see August Wilson because you want a big, fat, juicy story. It's about an underclass in America that rarely gets a chance to be on stage.
Reviewing the news this morning, Richard Tice, chairman of the Brexit Party, CNN's chief international anchor, Christiane Amanpour, and Laura Parker, the national coordinator of Momentum. All of that coming up soon, but first, the news with Roger Johnson.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning. President Trump has called for Nigel Farage to be involved in the Brexit negotiations. In his second intervention in British politics in as many days, ahead of his state visit to the UK, which starts tomorrow. President Trump has been speaking to the Sunday Times. He also had this to say about the government's Brexit strategy.
I wouldn't pay $50 billion. It's a big number. I wouldn't pay $50 billion. That's me. If you don't get the deal you want, if you don't get a fair deal, then you walk away.
A search is underway for a group of 8 climbers on India's second highest mountain. The group, including 4 from the UK, began the ascent of Nanda Devi almost 3 weeks ago, but failed to return to base camp. The Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, has said the number of migrants attempting to cross the Channel to reach the UK is deeply concerning. Yesterday, 74 people on 8 boats tried to make the crossing. They were intercepted by the UK Border Force off the south coast. Liverpool have become European football champions for the 6th time in their history after beating Tottenham in last night's Champions League final. An early penalty from Mo Salah and a late finish from Divock Origi gave them a 2-0 win in Madrid and a first trophy for Jurgen Klopp as the Liverpool manager. And in one of the biggest upsets in the history of heavyweight boxing, Anthony Joshua has lost his 3 world titles to Andy Ruiz Jr., who went into the bout as a rank outsider. Joshua started the fight in New York well, knocking Ruiz down in the 3rd round. But Ruiz rallied, flooring Joshua 4 times to become Mexico's first heavyweight champion.
But what do you know, man? I'm the first Mexican heavyweight champion of the world. I'm still pinching myself to see if this is real, man. Wow.
That's it from me. The next news here on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Andrew, back to you.
Very many thanks for that. And now, as ever, to the front pages. There's Liverpool roaring ahead on the front of the Sunday Times. But also they have the interview with Donald Trump. And he says, send in Farage and go for no deal. And as you heard there, he's not very keen on us spending that money on our exit either. The Sunday Express, again, has a Farage-based front page. I will smash the system, just like Trump, he says to the newspaper. And there's a lot more inside that as well. The Observer has a rather different take, you may think. This is Sadiq Khan, London's mayor. Trump is like a 20th century fascist, he says. And then finally, the Sunday Telegraph, Gove is ready to delay Brexit until next year. That's really interesting because he's one of the clear Brexiteer candidates in this election, and he's distancing himself quite markedly already from his old friend, or not friend, Boris Johnson. He says he would delay Brexit if necessary beyond October and indeed till 2020. And again, Liverpool in the front. Finally, the sport. We have to talk about the football, and we will at great length. That's the front of the Sunday Times sports section, all over in a mo. 2-0 there, but also Anthony Joshua, that extraordinary fight. Too late for the newspapers. Will he win last night's big fight in New York? And the answer, folks, is no, he will not. It was a surprise outcome. We like surprise outcomes on this programme. Richard Tice, let's start talking about the Trump interview. We expect Donald Trump to say undiplomatic and vivid things, and so he does.
Well, it's a pretty wide-ranging interview that he's done with Tim Shipman. I think the thing that really is of most importance to us as a country are his comments on Brexit. And actually they chime with what we've always been saying. You know, and we've just won the European elections on a clear platform, which was a WTO Brexit, that we shouldn't pay £39 billion, and that our elected MEPs should play a significant role in the negotiations. And he seems to agree with quite a lot of what we've just won the election on.
A lot of people will be saying at their screens, but the Greens and the Lib Dems did very well too. Let me ask you about your demand as a party after these elections. You want Nigel Farage and presumably the rest of the MEPs to be part of the British negotiating team. Exactly what does that mean?
Well, it means exactly what we stood for, which was that some of our selected candidates who've got significant track record in negotiations, in business, should go in. We should look at the state of the no-deal preparations so that we can work out what's been done and organised, what's still to be done and organised, so that we can then actually give our recommendations and frankly make sure that we are ready to leave on the 30th of October. Because what is clear from having travelled around the country in the last 7 weeks is that people want this done, and the mood and the enthusiasm, get it done and move on.
And you expect the government to, as it were, open the books to you and Nigel Farage so you can see what they're doing for no deal.
Because we stood on that platform, we have a direct, elected, democratic mandate. And if they believe in democracy, they should let us in this week.
Have they reached out the hand of friendship or openness?
Not yet, but they know our telephone numbers. We look forward to hearing from them.
All right, let's go back to the papers. Christiane, it's a very extraordinary moment, this Trump interview. We're used to him saying, as I say, vivid and surprising things and all the rest of it. But nonetheless, it is a big breach of protocol, is it not, for an American president to come in at the beginning of a state visit and say, I personally back this candidate rather than that one?
Look, of course it is, but that is what one expects from Donald Trump. He's done that in the past. He continues to do it. He has his own way, and he calls himself the disruptor, and he constantly proves that fact. I mean, I would say, though, that, your elections showed that if you do an amalgamation of the pro-Remain parties, they actually did better than the Brexit Party. Of course they did. And I would also say that having just come back from Europe and interviewed Angela Merkel, a fantastic exclusive, that they are very, very concerned about what effect Donald Trump would have on Europe as well, and who they may be negotiating with going forward.
Well, we'll hear about that. I mean, in terms of trying to interpret the European results as a pro or anti-Brexit thing, the problem is that you've got the Labour Party and the Tory party, and how do you include them? Do you include all Tory votes as pro-Brexit votes? And what kind of pro-Brexit votes? How do you assess the Labour vote? So you can argue that it was a very, very interesting elections, very exciting elections, but they don't actually resolve finally the question.
But if you look at the opinion poll in the Observer today, we are now heading the polls by a number of points, and then you've got the Labour Party. I think the country is moving towards actually getting this done, some clarity, some leadership, and that's what we offer.
Laura Parker, you know very well indeed that the Liberal Democrats would like to replace you, just as the Brexit Party would like to replace the Conservative Party. And we don't really know at the moment whether we are on the edge of an enormous political earthquake or not. But let's return to the Observer, which is a lot of fascinating stuff about all of this, including, as I was saying, Sadiq Khan speaking for those people who are horrified by the Trump visit and are preparing to protest.
Look, absolutely, and this talks to your point as well about Merkel's comments about what's going on in Europe. I mean, Sadiq has got an unequivocally hard-hitting piece here, and actually I agree with every word of it. He basically signals his significant concern about the fascistic language and approach which Trump, he says, has taken. I mean, it's all there, fake news, lying to your electorate, and trumpeting white supremacists, threatening to veto a ban on the rape as a weapon of war. I mean, this is incredible stuff. And as Sadiq said in this really hard-hitting piece, I mean, these are echoes of the 1930s and 40s. And we know that Trump's got his friends in Europe. He's talking to Salvini, Orban, the guy who's banning the press in Hungary.
And yet, we also know that, particularly post-Brexit, we are going to have, as a country, to look for our friends in the world, and America has been one of those. And therefore, to be insulting to the American president when he arrives is a dangerous thing to do.
Look, I don't think it's about insulting at all. I'm going to be on the protest. I hope lots of people will be. 11 o'clock, Trafalgar Square on Tuesday morning. It's not an insult at all. It's expressing a democratic right to protest and concern. And in fact, you know, look at the other piece in the Tisdale piece, which I think you wanted to talk about. I mean, this is a president who's withdrawn from the Paris Agreement on climate change.
Yeah. Well, look, here's the thing. Obviously, Europeans are very concerned about what this all means. They're very worried. The British should be worried because President Trump and his Secretary of State have made certain threats about sharing intelligence based on the Huawei situation.
Right.
But also, that could be very... I've got the Observer here, the Simon Tisdale piece, and that could be very difficult because Britain, as it has a diminishing global impact now, in a Brexit state, really does very, very clearly have an intelligence advantage and doesn't want to see itself shut out on the intelligence plate. Then you have the Europeans who are very worried in terms of the America First of two major issues right now. That's pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal and, of course, the climate deal. And the one thing we can all say is that these elections did show that by massive numbers, certainly the young generation are putting climate at the top of their agenda.
So this is
let's be very clear. Let's be very clear about this. America is our biggest strategic security partner, our biggest single trading partner, all right, and our biggest single foreign direct investment partner. We should be welcoming it, encouraging it, not talking it down and abusing it.
No, but you're absolutely right. That's why it's worrying to see the Americans threatening the intelligence cooperation. And I would say one other thing...
we'll be coming on to these later on, and we could talk about this all day. However...
But Congress says it will not pass a trade law if, for instance, the Good Friday Peace Agreement is threatened. So President Trump can say all that he likes, and he may mean it, but these trade laws and trade deals have to be passed by Congress.
That's a very important point. Let's turn to some of the other stuff, because there's a huge amount of Tory leadership campaigning going on in the papers, Laura, and I think Michael Gove, as I said right at the beginning, is making a very interesting intervention. If it turns out to be Gove versus Johnson, it is going to be a great spectator sport, whatever else.
Well, unfortunately, I think these things are much more serious than spectator sport. I mean, just before we came on air, we discovered there was another candidate. So I don't know how many there'll be by the time we finish.
Up to 13.
13, OK, so probably about 20 by the time we come off. I mean, Gove, I think, is trying to position himself as a sensible candidate, but in fact, if you look into the detail, well, for a start, it's not entirely clear what he thinks. He's saying that he would be prepared, and it's interesting that he thinks it's in his gift for us not to leave in October with no deal, but he's not ruling out no deal. Now, every economist on the planet thinks that no deal's a bad idea. The trade unions believe that it's going to be damaging for jobs. The notion that Gove is somehow now going to position himself as Mr. Sensible in the middle is a fantasy. I mean, we've saw what he did to the education system. There's not a teacher in the land who wants him to now take on Brexit.
Meanwhile, the atmosphere across the country is rising. An interesting piece in the Express, Richard Tice, about the abuse that your guys are getting.
You know, it's interesting, the sort of language that Sadiq is using in his Observer piece. But the truth is, during this campaign, the abuse, the vitriol, the attacks, physical attacks on our candidates, ending up with things like, in the Sunday Express, you can see this 30-foot swastika which is gone actually, 30-foot swastika that was painted on Lance Foreman's factory. I mean, this is just, you know, this is extraordinary stuff. No place at all in our democracy. And that's come from the left, and it's appalling. And it just, you know, people need to condemn it and call it out for what it is, Laura. And we urge you on your side.
The notion that this has come from the left, when Boris Johnson talked about Muslim women as letterboxes. The notion this has come from the left when the leader of your party stood in front of a poster in the 2016 referendum with a picture of Syrian refugees.
This is in the last month again. In the last month, where have these attacks come from?
Of course, I utterly condemn that, as does any... But the notion this has come from the left, when this is the language of the populist right, it's a disgrace.
Let's move on to mention the other candidates in this who are in the papers, because they're all over the place.
You got the time?
Sajid Javid has got a big piece in the Telegraph. Andrea Leadsom is there as well. Matt Hancock has a very interesting piece about his, I think, 5-part plan, or 3. I can't remember how many parts his plan for Brexit has got. But he is, again, saying that there must not be no deal. And there must be a renegotiation. That's thing. So we're seeing a division in the Tory party candidates between people who are going for no deal, people who are prepared to have no deal on the board, and all those who are prepared to. I mean,
isn't the fact of the matter that where is the maths? I mean, or as they say in America, math. I mean, is really just a new leader going to change the math in Parliament? I don't know. Perhaps not. Are the Europeans, as your party and Brexiters like to say, the Europeans will crumble when the time comes, or surrender when the time comes. They're showing no sign of it. Angela Merkel showed no sign of it. The leaders of the EU show no sign of it.
That's why the voters have given the confidence of making us win the election, because we stood on a WTO Brexit.
Yeah, but WTO
that
is not the solution. Even the WTO president has said to me that there is huge chaos ahead, and particularly some sectors will be very negatively affected. And guess which one? The service one, which is Britain's main economy.
And that's why we need to go in and see the state of the no deal preparations. But the great thing is we don't have to spend 39 billion. And that's what voters voted for. Trust the voters.
How many Liverpool supporters do we have on the sofa at the moment?
You definitely have a big one here.
Yeah.
This is literally the only thing that I'm ever going to be able to agree with you about. I'm glad that they won the football.
Yeah. It wasn't a very exciting
no, look, it wasn't the greatest game, but I mean, the picture on the back of the Sunday People, I'm not sure the Sunday People generally features on this programme, but it's a wonderful picture of the manager, Jurgen Klopp, being held aloft.
And a lot of people went down to Madrid.
Huge people had a lot of fun. Second time of trying in the last 2 years.
And Mo Salah has done one of the greatest things for Egypt, because it's not in a good place, Egypt, right now.
No, he is.
There's so much authoritarianism.
He is a true star.
The better Mo, if we can remember the previous one. Listen, thanks all very much. We've run out of time, but very interesting. Thank you very much indeed. And so to the weather this weekend's already seen the highest temperature of the year so far, and today could be hotter again. I'd stay in if I was you and watch the television. Over to Susan Powell in the Weather Centre. Susan.
A very good morning to you. The heat today, actually, Andrew, increasingly confined to eastern counties of England. The picture is changing as we speak. Low pressure's pushing into the west. It's bringing in some showers. It's kicking up the wind, and it's also heralding the arrival of some fresher air from the Atlantic. Here's the front marked nicely on our satellite picture, curling back into the centre of the area of low pressure that will start to push in to Northern Ireland later on today. Quite showery in the west for the next few hours. Much brighter for the evening, though, for the southwest, for Wales and Northern England. The showers by then heading further eastwards. As you said, though, we could still top that 28 across eastern counties this afternoon. More widely, though, we're in the high teens to the low 20s to the west. Some pleasant late sunshine, but then that curl of cloud, that centre of the low, rolls across Northern Ireland and into Scotland overnight. Some heavier rain again and some particularly gusty winds, 40-45 miles per hour. But you can already see that things are looking fresher for first thing on Monday to the south of the UK, where our lows last night were still in the high teens. A lot of sunshine around to the south for Monday across England and Wales. To the north, some further showers and a breezy day for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with the low centre nearby. Temperatures closer to average values.
Back to normal. Woody Johnson is President Trump's ambassador at the Court of St. James, a member of the Johnson & Johnson pharmaceutical family and a successful businessman in his own right. He's known the president across 4 decades, and he's with me this morning. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador.
Andrew, nice to see you.
Nice to have you
Thank
here.
you.
Can I ask, first of all, if everything goes well, assuming everything goes well, how would you like this visit to be remembered?
I think everything is going to go great. I think the stressing of the special relationship our two countries share, and looking back 75 years ago to D-Day and commemorating these young men and women who accomplished the impossible on D-Day, really.
A highly emotional moment, really.
Highly emotional, and I've been putting myself back in the shoes, kind of trying to put it, reading contemporaneous accounts of what happened back then, and it will get your hair standing.
Now, I said in the introduction, you've known President Trump since, I think, the 1980s, thereabouts.
Early 80s, yeah.
Just tell us something about President Trump that most people watching don't know.
President Trump, or Donald J. Trump, has not changed since I've known him. He's been an authentic person, always had just an uncanny ability to have a sense of the pulse of what was happening in New York City, where we both lived. And I've watched him progress. I've known his children as they were young. They went to the same schools, and just been impressed what a kind of father he is as well.
We see his volatility and his controversial nature and all the rest of it all over the screens all the time. What is it allows him to keep him going? I mean, because there must be something there that we don't see that keeps him.
I think a lot of the issues he talks about now, he's talked about for years. For instance, China. This is not a new subject for him. I think he wants to change it and give the U.S. a fairer place in the world, negotiating better deals rather than getting, having these agreements go on and on and on to the detriment of the U.S.
I think perhaps what we didn't expect this morning is to have the President of the United States not endorsing but offering his warm support to one candidate in particular, Boris Johnson, in this Conservative election. Right. And he says also that lots of other people have been asking for his endorsement as well. Has there been a little queue of people at the back of Winfield House knocking on the door, hoping to get the touch from Donald Trump?
Not that I'm aware at Winfield House, but he has known Boris for a long time. So I think what he's commenting on is just his knowledge of Boris as a person and all the meetings he's had with Boris. Rather than, I don't think he's said it's not an endorsement.
Do you think Boris Johnson would be a good Prime Minister?
That's up for you guys to decide. I mean, you're going to have an election now, so we'll see.
Only Tory members, but yeah.
Yeah. Tory members. That's, I mean, your public is going to have to decide, who the final two are and then sort it out.
Now, looking at the President's interview today, do you think that we should leave on October the 31st, deal or no deal?
That once again, that's up to you, and we're going to have a great relationship with your country, regardless of what happens. But yeah, I mean, I think from what my traveling around the country indicates, people are ready to go and move on. Even though the economy is doing reasonably well, it could do a lot better once this Brexit is finished.
You've done an interview yourself in the Express in which you say there's an extraordinary trade deal waiting for Britain, a very, very big, generous trade deal waiting for Britain, and President Trump says that could be done very, very fast. So what's the nature of that trade deal and how quickly could it be done after we leave?
I think the fact that it's on the president's desk day one, the minute you leave, and we can negotiate. We're already negotiating. I mean, we're already looking at the terms and conditions that will allow a successful negotiation. I think it will be done, with the president looking at it, will be done as expeditiously as any agreement we've ever had.
So you're negotiating already? I suppose the question
I would say
is
not negotiating, probably wrong term. I think we're looking at all the components of the deal and trying to get everything lined up. So when the time comes, we're ready to go.
Now, the president, one thing we do know about him, he's a deal maker. And in any deal, there's give and take. So can I ask you two areas that have worried a lot of British people about this potential deal? One is agriculture, farming, food standards and so on. Does Britain have to accept American agricultural standards and American food standards in order to get that deal?
No.
No?
No. But I think there's going to have to be some deal where you give the British people a choice. And American products would come over and be allowed to come over. Agriculture is extremely important to the president and any president, because agriculture in all 50 states, so there's 50 senators.
A lot of people.
But you give the British people a choice. If they like it, they can buy it. If they don't want it, they don't have to buy it.
Because there is a big choice here. I mean, you yourself have said in the past that the EU approach prizes history and tradition over innovation and science, and you've called it a kind of museum form of farming. And you've slightly poo-pooed British worries about chlorinated chicken and GMO foods and so on.
Not poo-pooing it, but even the EU has taken a position on things like chlorinated chicken and said the American food supply is as safe as anything in Europe. So it's not really poo-pooing, but that was probably the most interesting public relations campaign to ban American products that I've seen. I mean, if we could put that in reverse, we'd all make a lot of money.
So you said it's a public safety no-brainer. It's completely safe to eat.
Completely safe. And
do you think British people have to accept that as part of the deal?
No, I don't think they have to accept it. They, once again, can have a choice. Whether they want America. We have 5 million British people, coming over to the U.S. every year. And I've never heard one complaint about anything to do with chicken.
Okay, so the other big area, as you know, is the healthcare service. There's a great deal of fondness and enthusiasm for the NHS in this country, and a lot of people are worried that a big free trade deal with America means American pharmaceutical and medical corporations getting a slice of the NHS.
Oh, I don't think they'd be put in any particular position regarding that. And your national health care service is the pride of the country, and everybody has a highly emotionally charged issue. I think it's all going to be. Do you feel that
healthcare has to be part of the deal?
I think probably the entire economy would, in a trade deal, all things that are traded would be on the table.
Which includes healthcare.
I would think so.
Okay, let's talk about one of the other really big areas here. Something I'm sure the President is going to raise with the Prime Minister, which is Huawei, and whether Britain should allow that Chinese company to be heavily involved in its 5G network.
I think what you've heard from the President and other members of his staff is concern about the risk of allowing your infrastructure to be built by, by a country that has a totally different setup than we do.
And 5G is different from 4G, as I understand it, because if you're part of the system, you can have access to almost all the system, and therefore the Chinese are completely in.
They're completely in, and there's no such thing as the core or the outlying areas. It's all one big thing. So you can't have, as I understand it, you can't have the antennas all over and think that they're not part of it. So you've got a big risk, both security and prosperity, of building something with a country where the government can call up and say, I want this information, I want it now, and the company has to respond.
So that's the American worry, and we can see why. President Trump, again in his interview this morning, suggests that if Britain sticks with Huawei, that will have an implication for our security and intelligence arrangements with the United States going forward. Do you agree with that?
I do. You can also look at your private high-tech. This country is known for high-tech. You've got an unbelievable group of companies. All that stuff is subject, even because they're not going to be part of this exclusive network that the military has.
So if Britain goes with Huawei, what does that mean for our intelligence arrangements with America?
I think to be determined. I would go, what I think is happening now is, I understand that the British have not made a conclusion, not conclusively said that they're doing. I think it's, I would caution, according to the President and the people that have looked at that from the U.S. side, to move much more slowly.
And in terms of hard policy decisions, is that the single most important thing about this visit, do you think, Huawei?
On a policy side, I don't know if it's the most important. I think it's he's going to speak in broader terms, about the relationship we share and the whole level of prosperity and security.
Now, a lot of people watching will not know you. You've been here for 2 years, and of course you move with all the kind of posh knobs in London and all the top people. How do you get to know the British people more generally as an ambassador?
One of the things I do every week is I travel around the country. So I've been to Northern Ireland, Belfast, Wales, all over Wales, and the northern part of this country, Scotland, and just talking to people and finding out.
Literally wander around the streets?
Wandering around, go to coffee shops. I ask them which coffee shop, I love coffee, where I should go, who I should talk to. And so it's not just the people you described. I want to get their real opinion. What do they feel about how's life? How's it going in Newcastle or Manchester or Birmingham?
So there's the answer. Ambassador, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Now you know, if you see him, buy him a coffee. Now, my next guest has been a big player in the Theresa May story. At the time of the Tory leadership campaign, Andrea Leadsom was running in second place last time round before she pulled out, and it was her resignation now as Leader of the House of Commons that triggered the downfall of the current Prime Minister. She has a Brexit plan of her own, and she's with me now. Andrea Leadsom, why do you want to be Prime Minister?
Well, I genuinely believe in the amazing future for the UK once we've left the EU. I passionately supported Leave. I do believe I have the ideas that will take us forward into a post-Brexit world to a more compassionate society.
Now, a lot of people that you will want to appeal to, as it were, the Brexiteer part of the party, may ask, why would we possibly back Andrea Leadsom, given that she stayed inside the Cabinet during the agreement on the Irish backstop originally, during the agreement on the Chequers plan for a closer relationship with the EU, during the delay from March the 31st, the withdrawal agreement you were in the Cabinet for, the negotiations with Jeremy Corbyn, you stayed in the Cabinet. You stayed right until the end. Surely they prefer somebody who had the principle to resign earlier on.
Well, there's two ways to look at that. I took the view in 2016. I was determined to support Theresa May in getting Brexit over the line. And yes, over the last 3 years, I've had some very uncomfortable moments. But the reality is, it's better. No, it's better to stay in government and fight for Brexit. And that is exactly what I've been doing for the last 3 years. And it was only when we reached the point where the withdrawal agreement bill was going to be introduced with the prospect of a second referendum that it really seemed to me we'd moved away from delivering Brexit. Until that point, with all of the compromises, we would have been legally leaving the European Union with everything to play for. And that's why I felt all the way through walking away would have been a big mistake.
So you still think things like the Irish backstop and the full withdrawal agreement were worth doing?
I supported them, and as I say, it was very uncomfortable. But I have a 3-step plan for a managed exit, which I do believe is workable. I've been advocating it in government for some time now. And I think it's based on the premise that, number one, we have to leave the EU at the end of October. And number two, the withdrawal agreement bill is dead. The EU won't reopen the withdrawal agreement, and UK Parliament won't vote for it.
So to be absolutely clear, no more renegotiation. You accept that period has passed?
Absolutely, yes.
And so you're going for no deal?
No, I'm going for a managed exit. And I have a very clear... It's a very significant difference. So a managed exit means 3 steps. Number one, we would introduce legislation before summer recess on sensible measures such as citizens' rights, such as what you do about the future for Gibraltar, for our sovereign bases, on things like goods in circulation already. Those would be introduced before the summer recess, sensible measures Parliament can get behind. Step 2 is to ramp up preparations for all of the eventualities, including alternative arrangements for the Northern Ireland border, and very specifically regulatory agreements for sensitive sectors like automotive and aerospace, and customs agreements for agri-foods. But the third step... Okay.
Before we come to the third step, let me talk to you about the first 2 steps, because you say there's going to be side deals, side negotiations.
Yes.
Michel Barnier has been absolutely clear. If there is no deal, there is no more discussion. And he said again, each side will make its own unilateral contingency measures, but this does not mean mini deals in the case of no deal. He is ruling out mini deals specifically, which you're proposing.
Well, that's simply not the case, in the sense that even if, to use the common parlance, you were to leave with no deal, there would be arrangements in place. And what I'm talking about is making an offer to the European Union for things that we've already agreed, that were agreed and negotiated in the withdrawal agreement, that will enable us to leave with a managed exit. And very importantly, my third step is to travel as a ministerial delegation to meet with the EU27, not with the Commission, the outgoing Commission, but with the EU heads of state, to discuss with them the very sensible measures that the UK Parliament can take to ensure that we have a managed exit at the end of October.
And you're sure you'd be welcome, given that they'd said there is no more discussion, no more negotiation?
Yes, because at the end of the day, European politicians face the ballot box, as do UK politicians. It is in all of our interests, first of all, to move on. They don't want us hanging around for the next couple of years causing problems for them. They've got to get on with their project. And at the same time, we will all want to see the smoothest exit possible. And there are very sensible pre-agreed measures that we can now put into place before the end of October.
So you say we're definitely leaving at the end of October. There is therefore no transition period. It's a fast movement. So there are lots of other issues. There are 700 pieces of secondary legislation that need to be passed, and they include really, really important things covering fisheries and many other areas. There is simply not the time for those to get through Parliament.
So that's absolutely not correct, Andrew. As Leader of the Commons, my job was getting all legislation through. We actually got over 540 pieces of secondary legislation through by the time of March the 29th, which was when we should have been leaving. So in terms of the secondary legislation, we absolutely can get it through by October the 31st.
You know very, very well that in the context of a new leader of the Conservative Party going for no deal, Parliament is going to cause as much trouble as possible. They're going to make it very, very hard to get all that secondary legislation through, and primary legislation when it comes to things like fishing and so forth. You're going to have a very, very hard time, particularly as your good friend John Bercow is staying on and has made it absolutely crystal clear that he is going to allow Parliament every possible opportunity to have its say in this process.
So again, I have to disagree with you. As I say, as Leader of the Commons, we have already passed the vast majority, over 540 pieces of secondary legislation that prepares for all eventualities. The primary legislation is about future policies, and that is going through both houses. That is all well under control. In terms of what Parliament can do, provided that the new leader, as would be the case if I am the Prime Minister, makes clear that we're not seeking an extension, then Parliament will have 2 choices ahead of it. One would be to seek to revoke Article 50, and the other would be to no confidence the government and bring the government down. Those would be the only 2 choices. And quite honestly, with sensible measures that all parliamentarians, on citizens' rights, on goods in circulation, those are things that are practical steps that parliamentarians would want to see in place, both in the United Kingdom and in the European Union. So I honestly do believe that this plan is workable. It's very specific. It's very detailed. I've given it a huge amount of thought. And I do believe leaving at the end of October is what people want to see happen.
I mentioned him before. John Bercow has said very recently, that the House will want to have its say. The idea that Parliament won't have its say is just for the birds, simply unimaginable. How are you going to get round John Bercow?
So you know, John is a very influential and very powerful Speaker of the Commons, as they always are. And I do believe that as the office holder, he will absolutely stick to protecting the rights of Parliament, as he should. However, as I've said, the point is that for Parliament to actually change the outcome, you have to have some very significant change, such as crashing out with no deal. What I'm talking about is a managed exit with measures that I do believe parliamentarians will get behind.
But I mean, that can't happen given that they're not prepared to talk to us, and given they said there will be no side deals. Let's move beyond Parliament, however, and read you something about the real world.
I can't leave you with the last word on that. A managed exit is sensible measures that are in the interests of EU citizens and UK citizens. It's a managed exit. The EU don't want us to draw this out any further. They want to have this resolved. The UK public want to have this resolved. We need to give businesses confidence by talking about the plans as we go, so that we can leave with reasonable arrangements at the end of October.
Let's look at a specific case in that case. Let's look at the 1.2 million British people currently living in other EU countries now. They, in the event of a no-deal exit, they lose all their rights overnight. How do you deal with that?
So, as I say, my three-step plan, step one is to introduce a piece of legislation in the Commons that deals with citizens' rights. UK citizens in the EU.
That's EU citizens here.
Citizens,
I'm
no,
talking
and
about
UK and UK citizens in the EU.
We can't legislate for their rights in other countries.
Well, we can, because what we will be doing is putting in place. We will introduce a bill.
How can we legislate for the rights of British people living in France?
So
they're in France. They're under the French government. How can we legislate for their rights?
So the withdrawal agreement has negotiated mutual rights of citizens. What I'm talking about is the UK. No, I agree. But what I'm talking about is legislating in the UK. So we'd have second reading, and then as we go to see the European Union about the steps that we want to take, it is my expectation that the European Union will also want to agree the rights of citizens going forward.
So an expectation, we ask the other European countries if they will give the rights.
Absolutely.
So there's no plan, there's no guarantee for those people at all, is there?
Except that let's take a step back. The European Union want to see a proper Brexit. They don't want to have this crashing out with no deal. They also don't want this to be extended. My three-step plan is to propose legislation to ramp up preparations for all eventualities, and thirdly, very importantly, to talk to the European Union, culminating in a summit in Belfast and Dublin in September, to agree the terms under which the UK will leave the European Union at the end of October.
If I was a British citizen living in Spain at the moment, watching this interview, I wouldn't feel terribly reassured at the moment. But let me ask you about something else really, really important, which is the condition of all those British companies which are not prepared for no deal. Caroline Fairbairn of the CBI said this recently. She said £20 billion of additional customs fees and tariffs would rise overnight. 150,000 businesses do not have the systems to trade on WTO terms, and company headquarters are already leaving the country. That's happening now.
So absolutely, Caroline Fairbairn is right that what businesses need is confidence and certainty. So we have to leave at the end of October, and with a managed exit. And very clearly, the preparations for the exit at the end of October would be very openly communicated. One of the things, one of the problems that we've had.
If you're one of those 150,000 businesses.
It's not a gamble. These are very sensible measures, very carefully thought through, already agreed with the European Union. And what I'm seeking to do is to implement those so that we have an agreed way forward that the EU and the UK can get behind, so that we leave the EU on October the 31st. But really importantly, for businesses and citizens in the UK, we need to be transparent about the preparations and communicate broadly so that people can actually share in that information.
Can you as government reach 150,000 businesses and help them to prepare for no deal?
Yes, absolutely.
Really?
One of the things one of the things I would like us to do is to provide a pamphlet to citizens and to businesses. Andrew, you're not actually letting me answer any question at the moment. I would like us to be providing a pamphlet to households and to businesses that sets out exactly the steps that they need to take in different eventualities. But importantly, we need to have a discussion about how we deliver this managed exit by the end of October, so that businesses do have that certainty and clarity.
Okay. So for expats living over, you go and ask other countries if they're going to do the right thing by them, and for businesses, you're going to give them a pamphlet. There's 100,000 businesses at the moment the HMRC can't contact at all. So the idea that you're going to be able to get to all of those businesses and help them through this process is, I suggest, for the birds.
No, HMRC absolutely can contact them. I've sat on the Cabinet subcommittee looking at no-deal preparations for the last 2 years, and it is quite clear that HMRC is able to contact all businesses. But
any
Andrew, I do want to just restate
the three things you said.
Setting out a managed exit is absolutely in our interest and in the EU's interest.
Now, nonetheless, any Conservative leader in these circumstances is going to have a reduced number of options. That's obviously clear. Can I ask you, in that context, do you absolutely rule out a general election this year if you're leader of the Conservative Party?
Yes, I do. I think a general election would be, well, I mean, obviously, if Parliament was to no confidence the government, then it would happen. But again, with sensible proposals for how we deliver a managed exit at the end of October, I do not believe that we would lose colleagues on our own side. And let's not forget, with Conservative MPs and our confidence and supply partners, we do have a majority in Parliament. So I don't anticipate a no confidence at Parliament.
One you can answer, I suspect, very quickly. Do you rule out a referendum, another referendum?
Yes.
Right, well, let's move on to some other quick-fire questions, because there's lots of other policies that we should be talking about. What's your plan? You've said it's very, very important. What's your plan for social care?
Well, I will be announcing my policies very specifically at my campaign launch. I mean, the Prime Minister hasn't actually resigned as yet, and the campaign kicks off on the 10th of June. But I do intend to resolve the issue for social care by the next general election. I think it will need to be a cross-party commission. It's something that's in the nation's interest that we resolve. I think there is the prospect for a reinsurance-style scheme that enables all people to receive social care cover from a young age.
This is meant to be the quick-fire bit. Can I ask you, HS2, yes or no?
A very urgent review for taxpayer value for money.
All right, you heard the Ambassador Johnson talking there. What about Huawei? What's your instinct? Go with Huawei or don't go with Huawei?
Take the advice of our security analysts, who are very clear-eyed about the risks posed.
And does that mean go with them or not? Sorry.
Well, it means take the advice of our security analysts, who always look very carefully at the national interest.
Could you envisage yourself doing an alliance or a deal with the Brexit Party going forward?
No, I'll talk to all political parties. I think it's important to reach out, but there won't be an alliance.
All right, you've talked about LGBT rights. What is the age up to which parents should be able to say to their children, you're not to hear this stuff?
Well, relationship education is absolutely vital. Young people need to understand the diversity and equality of our nation and our society, so that's vital. In terms of actual sex education of all types, then it's right that parents do have a say, and that will be what's right in those parents' opinions.
Up to what age do you think?
I'm not going to prescribe that, but certainly all children should learn about fairness and equality and diversity in our society.
All right, now you know why I'm going to ask this. Do you still think you're the only mother in this race? Do you still think being the only mother makes you a potentially better Prime Minister?
Well, I never thought it, and I believe we all have an equal stake in our society.
All right, Andrea Leadsom, thanks
you
very much indeed for talking to us. Over the past 10 years or so, Sir Lenny Henry has moved beyond his early TV comic roots and proved himself to be a very fine stage actor. I caught up with him recently to discuss his latest theatre role in King Hedley II, a play by the American writer August Wilson. Lenny Henry plays an ex-convict trying to get his life back on track. Set in the early 1980s in Pittsburgh, it's got plenty to say to a modern London audience with its themes of masculinity, drug use, knife crime and jail time.
When you pull that trigger, you done something. You done something more than most other people. They live on the safe side. But see, you done been God. God decide when somebody ready, not you. He decide when he wants somebody. God don't like that. You thinking you him. He cut you loose. It's about an underclass in America that rarely gets a chance to be on stage. And August Wilson was very clear. You know, okay, we have the kings and the queens and the aristocracy on stage telling their story, but he wanted to look at the garbage man or the guy who'd done time or the woman who did cleaning down the road. He wanted to give those guys a chance to be on stage and have their moment in the spotlight to tell their story. And in Reagan's America, where there was a war on drugs, which translated as a war on the black underclass, the story is about people not being given a chance in society.
In terms of the language and the richness of the plotting, I mean, this is a traditional tragedy, and, you know, we hear an awful lot about Arthur Miller and Eugene O'Neill, and these white American playwrights, but this is right up there with them.
Yeah, and August Wilson went to the Eugene O'Neill playwriting workshop and worked with extraordinary dramaturgs who helped him shape his drama. And he'd read all the great dramas, the Shakespeares and the Arthur Millers and the Eugene O'Neills, and so he had an idea of what the ideal American play was, but he wasn't actually concerned so much later in telling a traditional white American story. He wanted to use African American tropes, and he was also very clear that he wanted to connect African American story with its African heritage. You come and see August Wilson because you want a big, fat, juicy story. He had a little trouble. How much time you do down there?
7 years. I did 7 years. I was supposed to do 10.
I did 5. 5 years in the Alabama Penitentiary feels like 15.
I see you ain't spend no time down in Western State Penitentiary.
I'm 66 years old, and I never had to use my pistol but once. It was enough for most people just knowing I had it. It was enough for me. I had to cut me a couple of people, but I never had to use my pistol but once.
You say rightly, this is very much an American play, and there's a lot of guns there, but there's an almost indrawing of breath at one moment in the play when King is handed a machete, and you suddenly think this is also about knives, this is also about London.
We've had some problems here with knife crime and with street crime, but what's great is people will hopefully come and see this and hear something about themselves and learn another facet of the story. It isn't just about lack of education, it isn't just about training schemes, it's about life, parenting, education. There are all things contributing to these situations, and you can learn a lot from watching this play.
When I came in, I reckon about half the audience were local black people, which is extraordinary for a London theatre. You don't see that many black people in an audience
usually,
anywhere else.
If there's a black person in an audience at a theatre, it's usually me.
Yeah, well, there you are. But, you know, we big this play up. And
I'm
what
joking.
happens is
there is a theatre-going audience in our community, and we want to see plays just like everybody else. When I saw Othello at the National with David Harewood, there was a wonderful moment when a black lady who had all her shopping next to her stood up and said, "Don't listen to Iago, he's lying." And I thought, that's great, that's brilliant. But it's also catering to a community that isn't just going to come and see African or African-American or Jamaican plays. Hopefully they're going to be enticed to see all kinds of plays.
Now, you've got an autobiography coming out this year. Who Am I Again?
Who Am I Again? Published by Faber, Andrew.
Very good. What are we going to learn about Lenny Henry that we don't know?
Well, you're going to learn about the struggle of being a diaspora kid. My parents came here in the 50s, and I've done jokes about this stuff, but I've rarely talked seriously about the pressure and stress of growing up in the Midlands in the late 50s, early 60s. It was tough. I lived in an area where there was racism. I endured racism almost every day at school, and it was something I had to learn to overcome. I talk about the sadness of being in the Black and White Minstrel Show, and I reflect on that. And I talk about lots of things. I talk about being in love. I talk about the pressure of being a young person in show business and how I wouldn't, if my child had wanted to be on Britain's Got Talent or something, how I probably would have said, maybe you should go to uni first and, you know, see where you want to be. You know, it'll still be there in 4 years' time. You know, do it then. So I talk about that.
And you mentioned growing up with racism. You did an extraordinary thing, which is you talked about your anger about the Windrush scandal in front of the Prime Minister. Now, you know,
I didn't mean to, it just came out.
You're an experienced guy, but nonetheless, standing up in front of the Prime Minister and directly addressing her about that must have been quite a moment.
You don't get to an age when we can finally breathe out and say, yes, I reach. No need to worry about racism anymore. Just ask the Windrush generation. Our thoughts and prayers go out to those people, by the way. Anybody who's threatened with deportation or detainment. We've got to sort that, right? We're going to do that? It was a shock that the words were coming out of my mouth, but my family is affected by this. We didn't come over on a Windrush. We came over about 10 years later when there wasn't a camera crew there. But we are part of a diaspora that travel from Jamaica to this country. And the fear that was imposed on the black community by this incredible policy of sending people back if they don't have a piece of documentation for every year they've been in this country was palpable. You could feel it. Even in my family, my sister rang me and said, I came over on Dad's passport. I know I'm a British citizen, but how does this affect me? This was a really close thing to me, and I felt I had to say something at this extraordinary Stephen Lawrence memorial. And actually, what was really good about it is Neville Lawrence said that was the right thing to have said at this point in time. And I do want them to think about this. This is something that must be thought about and dealt with.
And it's not over.
And it's not over, and it needs to be sorted out. And when they sort out their current problems, this is something they need to really address.
Lenny Henry, it's been great talking to you. Thanks very much.
Nice to talk to you too. Thank you.
And King Hedley II is at the Theatre Royal Stratford East until the middle of June. Lenny Henry will be touring the UK in the autumn, asking the question, who am I again? Now, since the fall of the coalition, the Liberal Democrats have had an utterly miserable time, but the divisions inside the two biggest parties over Brexit have given them a sudden new lease of life. And in admittedly one poll this week, they were found to be Britain's most popular party. Sir Vince Cable standing down, so they now need to choose a new leader, and his current deputy, Jo Swinson, has declared that she wants the job, and she's with me now. Jo Swinson, how big are your ambitions for this party now?
There's no limit on my ambitions for the Liberal Democrats. I think we're at a pivotal moment in our politics where the two-party structure is fracturing, and there is a real appetite for a liberal movement, for people who believe in our values, who say immigration's a good thing, that we need to reshape our economy so that it works for people and planet. And those people are joining us in their thousands, and I want to lead the Liberal Democrats to build that liberal movement.
You'd be a different kind of leader. You're much younger, you've got two small children and so on. How would you be a different leader? What would it feel like?
Well, I mean, you know, I'm putting myself forward for this job. I've got 12 years of experience as an MP, 3 years as a minister. You know, I think I can build this movement by reaching out to new generations of voters, to people who do share those values, who, in particular, on the issue of our relationship with the European Union, really want someone to say, Europe is a good thing. It has been a beacon for peace, hope and human rights.
OK, so you know very well the reason the Lib Dems have been so popular recently is that you've said you're going to stop Brexit. One simple, difficult question, how?
The way to stop Brexit is to secure enough votes in the House of Commons for a people's vote on the deal. And that means convincing more MPs. Now,
more Tory MPs,
yes,
who've been completely against it. And you're saying vote for me and I will persuade Tory MPs to vote for another referendum.
Well, that's the challenge that we need to do, and we need to work cross-party to do that, and I have been through the People's Vote campaign, the Lib Dem face of that movement. We got to 280 MPs in favour of a People's Vote at the last count, but we do need more. Now, the European elections helped put pressure on the Conservatives. One of the new contenders in the race today, hard to keep track of the Tory leadership contenders, Sam Gimmer, he's standing on the position of backing a People's Vote. Now, you know, unfortunately, I don't think Sam's going to win, but I think that discussion needs to happen in the Conservative Party, and we need to put pressure on.
Well, let's talk about what kind of referendum that would be, because he and some of the other contenders all want no deal to be on the ballot paper. And Vince Cable said you have to do that because there are so many people in the country who want no deal that it would be undemocratic and wrong to take that off the ballot paper. But you, Jo Swinson, want it off the ballot paper.
I think no deal would be irresponsible for our country because of what it would mean for our economy, for our security and for our NHS. But I recognise that I don't get to set this question. You know, my red lines are that the People's Vote needs to have specific deliverable Brexit on the ballot paper, and it needs to have the chance for people to choose to remain in the European Union.
OK, because, I mean, you may think no deal is a disaster, and for the rest of it, there are millions of people who don't think that, and would feel really, really outraged if that was taken off the agenda.
But I mean, this is the irresponsibility of what the Prime Minister, Theresa May, has sort of let happen, as if this is some kind of reasonable option. And when I hear Conservative leadership contenders like Andrea Leadsom talking about a managed exit, as if this is something you can manage and plan for. I mean, it's, you know, planning for no deal. It's like saying you're going to plan for your house to burn down. You might get contents insurance, you're still going to lose all your stuff.
That's your view and your opinion.
It's the government's view, actually. It's the government says the economy will be £140 billion a year worse off if we go for a no-deal exit.
Sure, but all I'm making is a different point, in a sense, a democratic point. Let me read you this. If there is a large swell of opinion which says no deal, then this is an option which you'd have to offer in a democratic vote. That's Vince Cable. He's right, isn't he?
Look, as I say, the Electoral Commission sets the question, and from my perspective, it has to be something that is specific, because we got into this mess.
Well, you might not like it, but no deal is specific.
Because Brexit, well, I mean, it doesn't actually tell you what happens the day after,
No,
because if we never have any kind of deal, you're just in this sort of perpetual limbo catastrophe. But we do need to have a specific option, because Brexit means Brexit was the most meaningless phrase ever, and we had this blank canvas to which everybody could project their own form of Brexit. Brexiteers cannot even agree among themselves, even now, what Brexit means. That's why it needs to go back to the people with the people's vote.
You know, but I'm sure you've talked to them as well, there's lots of people who are Labour voters for years and years and years who voted Liberal Democrat in the European elections with their fingers over their nose because they remembered the coalition. Now, you've spoken about this quite a lot, but I've been reading what you've said, and what you haven't really addressed is austerity itself, whether you, Joe Swinson, believe that austerity was a mistake or not.
Well, I think in 2010, with the financial crisis that was unfolding, we did need to make cuts. Now, actually, the cuts we delivered were pretty much identical to what Labour had set out before the 2010 election, Alistair Darling's spending plans. So we did need to constrain spending because
do you
of the
regret
deficit.
any of those cuts?
Of course I do, because
which ones in
I mean,
particular?
I've said the bedroom tax would be an example where it just was not the right policy. We shouldn't have let that through.
Tuition fees?
We shouldn't have let that through for, I would say, different reasons. We actually delivered a policy that got more people from low incomes going to university.
Police cuts?
But we had said that we wouldn't do it, so we shouldn't have done it.
Police cuts, welfare cuts?
And we stopped a lot of welfare cuts. But equally, as I say, the bedroom tax was an example where we shouldn't have. So we didn't get everything right in coalition.
Can you see why a lot of people who have voted Labour look at you even now and say what you are really is you are the pro-Remain wing of the Conservative Party?
Well, that's an absolute nonsense. You know, we were in a coalition and we had to compromise on various issues. That is the essence of coalition. But we are a Liberal party standing up for human rights, standing up to say immigration is a good thing and that we need to reshape our economy.
You're in a contest, of course, as I said right at the beginning, with Ed Davey, among others, Sir Ed Davey. He said this morning that among his green policies is no internal flights. He's going to stop flying internally. Would you say the same thing?
Well,
we have to change our behaviour in some radical ways.
I absolutely agree with what he says, which is that we need to make sure we have the infrastructure to make that a reality. So, yeah, I represent a constituency that's 400 miles from London. Ed Davey obviously represents a constituency that's in London. High Speed 2 is so important for the future of our economy and our country, but it is not enough. It's currently planned to stop at Manchester. We need to have 21st century infrastructure to move to a zero carbon world, and we're running our railways on 19th century railways.
So would you say to people watching, actually, if you're taking flights because they're more convenient inside the UK, you should rethink your behaviour a bit?
Well, I think we should make this easier for people. I try to take the train when I can. I'm quite often on the sleeper train between London and Glasgow. But what I would also say, I went to the Extinction Rebellion protests, and what was interesting about that movement was that it was about trying to make it easier for people to make the right decisions. We need systemic changes to tackle the climate emergency.
Did you go to observe or to protest?
I was protesting. I took my 5-year-old along. We had good discussions with people about the issues. I think it's important that people are involved in protesting and engaging in these kind of democratic protests. I think it's important for young people to learn that too.
Well, Joe Swinson, we may or may not, but probably may see a lot more of you. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us today. Thanks. Now then, most observers of the Tory leadership contest put Boris Johnson and Michael Gove a bit ahead of the rest. But the Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, is breathing down their necks. He's got a very different story to tell, and he's with me this morning. Sajid Javid, why do you want to be Prime Minister?
Well, good morning. I'm very concerned about the challenges we face as a country. I think there's at least 3 very significant challenges. I think I'm uniquely placed to deal with them. We need to deliver Brexit. We need to unify our country, and we need to keep Jeremy Corbyn out of Downing Street. And in doing that, I think I've got a credible and honest plan that will deliver Brexit. I think because of my own background, my experience and my vision for the future, I think we can bring the country together.
All right, just to explain to us in absolutely crystal clear terms what your Brexit proposal is.
Well, my plan is, first of all, is to recognise that We're not going to have another general election before Brexit is delivered. I don't think that would be right in any way whatsoever. So we have to deal...
You may not be able to stop it as Tory.
I may not be able to stop it.
If you lose a vote in the House of Commons, it happens.
I may not be able to stop it. We're in a parliamentary democracy, but I want to recognise that the next leader, the next Prime Minister, will be dealing with this Parliament and this Speaker, and we have to recognise the division and the challenges that exist in that Parliament. So what I will do is focus on the one Brexit deal that has already got through Parliament, and that was the withdrawal agreement with a change to the backstop. It's the only thing that's got through Parliament at the moment.
So you would renegotiate the backstop?
I would try to renegotiate the backstop. And what I would do in doing that is that I would focus on Ireland. I think Ireland is the absolute key to this. It is, you could sort of say it's the tail that wags the dog on this. And we need to make sure that we can do more to build that goodwill with Ireland, to give them more confidence. I've thought long and hard about this. In my department at the moment, I've got border force. We've done work for months on what alternative arrangements on that border could look like. And if I may, and what's missing is that goodwill. And what I would do is I would make a grand gesture, a grand offer to Ireland that we would cover all their costs, the upfront costs, the running costs of a new digitised border. I think it can be done in a couple of years, but we would cover their costs.
I do want to come on to that in a minute. But before we do, let's talk about the first part of the plan, which is to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement, the backstop. Let me read you what the Luxembourg Prime Minister said about that this week. Now, I'm going to read you slowly because it's important. No, he said. Renegotiate, no. No, 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 no. No renegotiation, no. That's 10 no's so far. We had the negotiation, we finished the negotiation, and that is more or less exactly what many of the other leaders say as well, including Mark Rutte, who's a friend of Britain, including the Taoiseach in Ireland, including Michel Barnier, and many more. You will not get that renegotiation.
Well, look, I understand that, and I understand where the Europeans are coming from, but what I also understand is that they too want to see an orderly Brexit for us. They want to see a deal with the UK. But I'll tell you what.
How many more times does he have to say no before you can hear him?
Your own reporter from Europe, Cathy Adler, she reported, I think, just last week that she's detecting amongst European leaders a bit of regret, thinking that perhaps they pushed Theresa May too hard. She's detecting a change in mood. Now, this is your own reporter saying this.
I'm just reading out loud what they have been saying in public. All the way through, we're told they didn't really mean it, they don't really mean this, they'll break apart, they won't stick together, and we've been wrong about this. We may still be wrong about this. They may very well be unprepared to renegotiate in a serious way. Let me, however, come on to your Irish border proposals. Now, you say that the border force thinks that this can be done. Have you spoken to anyone in the border force you can quote? Can you give us any detail? Can you explain to us why they think this can be done?
I've commissioned work from border force. Remember, border force, they do just that. They run borders. We advise other countries around the world. They're very good at it. And
will you publish it?
If I'm allowed to publish it, I will. If I'm Prime Minister, I will publish a lot more because I want to see more transparency in this debate. But what I am sure of is that a modern digitised border, which is a completely open border with no infrastructure on the border, because I believe passionately in that, is necessary for our union and to protect our union, that I think it is right that we make a gesture to Ireland to do something differently. And also, if I may say, I think it is right that we pay for it because it's economically, I think it makes sense because it will unlock a Brexit deal. And morally, I think it's right because we're committed to peace on the island of Ireland.
Lots of people would like it to happen for very good reasons. Most people say it's not ready yet, and it may become available one day, but we're a long way away. Simon Coveney, the Tánaiste, the Deputy Prime Minister in Ireland, says, this is like saying to Ireland, we are going to replace the backstop with an aspirational hope and a commitment that somehow we will solve this, but we don't know how. Is that reasonable? Your agreement is an agreement to have an agreement, but you don't know what it's actually going to be.
Well, I don't think it's just an aspirational hope, because as I've said, I've done work on this. Border Force has done work on this. You can have a digitised border that is very different to the backstop. It can be done. It can be done in 2 years. And you know what Border Force says? They say the main thing that's missing is goodwill on both sides, that ability to want to cooperate and want to get this done. So something needs to break that deadlock, and I've got a plan for that.
What I'm pointing out to you is that the Irish government says it's unworkable. Let me come on to the centrepiece of your strategy, however, because I thought there's one slightly strange thing in the way that you laid it out in the newspapers beforehand. You said, first of all, that you're going to prepare and plan for no deal. And you've accepted that the talks might not happen, so we might end up with no deal at the end of October. But you've also said, let me read it back, that it's simply not credible to promise you can deliver no deal if Parliament is set against it, as Parliament is. Anyone who promised this would risk drawing us into a pre-Brexit general election this year, driving us into a pre-Brexit general election this year. A disaster, you say, first and foremost for our country and public trust in democracy, but also for our party. So it sounds to me like you're saying, elect me and my plan B is disaster.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I mean, you've read it out perfectly correctly. Let me explain. No responsible leader of this country cannot prepare for no deal. You have to prepare for no deal. I'm not saying I'm going to prepare for no deal because that's my plan, that's what I want to deliver. I'm clear, I want a deal. I passionately want a deal. But it is only responsible to prepare for the possible outcome of a no deal. I mean, at a minimum, for example, France has already said, it said a while back, there's been reports that they may not even agree to an extension. A future extension would require all countries to agree. Now, I don't want to see an extension. I want to see us leave on October the 31st. But there is a real possibility that a no deal could happen, and it's absolutely responsible to prepare for that. And also, what I want is to make sure we use the time we've got to prepare even more.
You've raised yourself the question of an extension. Can I ask you directly, are there any circumstances in which Sajid Javid, as Prime Minister, would ask for an extension beyond the end of October?
I would not want an extension.
No,
I would not.
Want is one thing. Would you? Are there any circumstances in which you might ask for it?
Look, I'm clear that my plan would be to leave on October the 31st. I want to leave with a deal.
I'm listening.
But if I have to choose between no deal and no Brexit, I would pick no deal. But what I want and what I will absolutely focus on is leaving with a deal.
OK, I'm listening very, very carefully to your words. You're an experienced politician. I ask you again, are there any circumstances in which you would leave you would extend beyond the end of October?
I cannot envisage circumstance where I would want to have an extension. Or what I would.
Lots of
no, but let me.
words
You quoted from my article.
Yeah.
And let me just pick, because at the end of that same article, I think you're referring to, what I've said is the obvious, that we are a parliamentary democracy. We are not selecting at this point. We're not selecting a dictator for this country. We're selecting a prime minister who will run a minority party in a minority government. And what that means is that we are subject to Parliament, the sovereignty of Parliament. So what I cannot predict, and what no one can predict, is what Parliament may itself do. And now it's got this power to have its own sort of initiated legislation. I can't predict that.
But in our parliamentary system, the Prime Minister does have one absolute, clear, extraordinary power in this process, which is only the Prime Minister can go to Brussels and say, please, can we have an extension? Which is why it's so important to ask people like you whether you would ask for that under any circumstances. It's not what Parliament does, it's what the Prime Minister does.
Well, that's not something I would do.
You would not ask for an
it's not something I would do. But let me just say again, we're a parliamentary democracy. What we've seen in the last few months is Parliament has taken on some extraordinary powers to initiate its own legislation.
So if Parliament asked for it, you could have,
if it's statute, if it's the law, I would not break the law if I was Prime Minister. Of course I would observe the law. You know, this is about leading a parliamentary democracy. And remember, the whole point of Brexit is also to honour that referendum, which is also about democracy, as is our Parliament and its sovereignty.
You are Home Secretary. Can you promise us now that if we leave without a deal, Britain will be as safe afterwards as we are now?
What I can promise is that we will continue to be one of the safest countries in the world. What I will not...
That's not a yes.
Well, we will continue to be a very, very safe country. That said, I've always recognised the value of European contribution when it comes to security.
So the answer is a bit less safe. A bit less safe.
I would like us to have that cooperation. But let me tell you, we talked about planning for no deal. Again, I don't want no deal, but we need to plan. What I've already done as Home Secretary, and lots of people said this won't be possible, is I've tried to work on bilateral no-deal security agreements with our European partners. And just a couple of weeks ago, I announced that I've reached such an agreement with Germany, one of our biggest security partners, who have said publicly, if there is a no deal, they will enter into a no deal security arrangement with us. So there's a lot we can do to still protect our security cooperation, even in a no deal situation.
OK, the other thing you've said as a candidate is that you want 20,000 more police on our streets.
That's right.
And you've said in very clear terms why you want this. You've said that it's because no police means less crime. And you've described that as a no-brainer. More police means less crime. No-brainer. Now, the reason I'm asking for you about this is that you have said exactly the opposite about a year ago on this programme. I asked you about why aren't you having more police, and you said, I'm not pretending for a second that it's a like-for-like capability. You said it's not like that. The fall in crime, the rise in crime, is not connected to the fall in police numbers.
Well, first
now
of all,
you've changed your position completely.
Well, I think what I've realised is, being Home Secretary now for a year, I've been able to look at a lot more at the evidence, speak to a lot more police officers,
So
and it's
do you think
clear
you were
to
wrong
me.
then?
No, I think this is what I'd say. I think first of all, it depends which type of crime you're talking about. So let me give you an example. We've seen a significant rise in the last few years in what I would call the more complex crimes. Things like cybercrime, reporting of historic sexual offences, modern slavery. These are all very, very serious crimes, but they are very complex. So what I've realised is that you do need many more police resources for this. Now, I knew this for a while, but obviously, if I'm not the Prime Minister, I can't make these decisions on what should be the overall spending priorities for a government.
Are you saying that you wanted more police in the past as Home Secretary, but were stopped by the Treasurer or the Prime Minister from doing it?
Well, I'm saying that...
So that's the implication of what you're saying.
I'm partly saying that. So I wanted more police, and I have got more police. So this year we're seeing 3,500 more police officers or police staff this year because of the record police settlement I got. But what I'm saying, I want to be very clear, we need to go much further. We need to put an extra £1 billion a year into policing, which will mean 20,000 extra officers, and I think that is necessary to continue the fight against crime, but also to build more public confidence.
You talked about complex crimes. Quite simple crimes, murder, knife crime and robbery, have also gone up quite substantially on your watch. You said in this programme last April, for anyone to suggest that serious violent crime is caused by police numbers, it is not backed up by the facts. The evidence does not suggest that those are the facts. The facts are that we had much higher numbers of police 10 years ago and much higher numbers of violent crime. In other words, you were saying something that you now say is not true.
Well, no, that was a response. That question is a response to those people who say it's all about police numbers, it's all about police resources. And what I've said when it comes to serious violence, which I'm hugely concerned about the rise that we've seen, we need action on all fronts. And I've accepted all along, and I've said it many times, including in Parliament, that we do need more resources. And we've provided some of those resources. We need more police powers, such as stop and search, and I changed the rules. We have the Offensive Weapons Act. We need action on multiple fronts, including early intervention. But what you've asked me about today is more police numbers.
As Home Secretary, and you are Home Secretary now, if you'd had your own way, we would have more police on the beat now.
Yes, even more.
So you were stopped from having more police on the beat?
Well, it's a collective decision. So I cannot set the overall priorities of the government. If I were Prime Minister, of course, I have a much bigger say on what the overall priorities should be. And what I've said, and what I said in that article, is that a priority must be crime and law and order.
We don't have enough police on the streets of Britain because of Theresa May and Philip Hammond.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that I want to see, if I was leader and Prime Minister, I would want to see more police on the streets, and I think it's justified.
Okay. A few quick-fire questions. We've been talking a lot about Huawei this morning. Huawei, yes or no? Instinct.
I would not want any company, whichever country it's from, has a high degree of control by a foreign government to have access to our very sensitive telecommunications network.
That sounds like no. What about the tens of thousands immigration target that the party has been hooked on for so long? Would you keep that?
No. I don't think there should be any arbitrary immigration targets. I think we should always be aiming for low, sustainable net migration, but it should be based on the country's needs.
Top rate of tax under a Sajid Javid government?
Well, when it comes to tax, my priority will always be to cut the basic rate of tax. But if cutting the top rate means you can raise more revenue, like with what happened last time it was cut, billions extra revenue, and that means more nurses, more teachers, more police, I would cut it if it brings in more revenue and gives us better public services.
Down to where, do you think?
I don't know. I'll be led by the evidence.
All right. HS2, yes or no?
Yes.
Keep HS2. OK, finally, Donald Trump has said in his very interesting interview this morning that lots of Conservatives have been asking for his support. Were you one of them?
No.
You haven't phoned up the cone and asked for his support?
I don't think I'm one of them.
That's very interesting because, obviously, if you become Prime Minister, as Disraeli was the first Jewish Prime Minister, so you will be the first Prime Minister from a Pakistani background, a Muslim background. You're going to be seeing the President very shortly, I'm sure. Are you going to raise with him the Muslim travel ban?
But what I would raise with the President and his team is, first of all, I'd welcome him to the UK. I think it's great that the President of the United States is coming here, and I'd thank him for all the cooperation, especially on security, that I see day in, day out, which saves lives in Britain.
So the words Muslim travel ban don't appear in that opening thought.
I'd be thanking him for all that the United States does to help Britain.
Sajid Javid, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. Thanks to all my guests. We'll be back next Sunday with even more people vying to be the next Prime Minister. But until then, goodbye.